A lot of people are in the past or the future, and they are worried about the future. They're worried about judgment. They're worried about getting the words. They're worried, worried, worried. They don't have to do that very long, disconnect up into their head to worry about judgment before they believe that it's true. And then they've created a habit where they're never really grounded in the now to have a conversation with us right now. And so the listener might pick that up as indifference, or you don't really care about me. And that's not the truth. The truth is, I'm worried about you judging me or whatever.
Man of Mastery, episode 70 with Tracy Goodwin. As you guys know, this show, its purpose is about helping you, all of us, in the pursuit of self-mastery, the best version of ourselves, but not just for ourselves. It's self-mastery in service to something, someone bigger, right? Service to others, service to our community, our family. And in that spirit, it's the best version of ourselves for those others, right? As men, as fathers, sons, parents, husbands, whatever that might look like, leaders, members of our community. So with that in mind, one, I want to thank you for being here, working on yourselves, having that interest of self-mastery and service to others, but also to ask of you, the greatest compliment you could pay, the greatest gift you could give would be if you find value here in the guests and some of the hints and nuggets, then share it with someone else that might also find some inspiration or value in the same, that has that same drive to better themselves and help their world. So one thing before we jump in today, as you know, this show currently is on a bi-weekly Thursday schedule. I'm releasing it on a Friday. So no excuses, accountability and responsibility. I screwed up. So there's some reasons for it, but no excuse. So one, in terms of accountability, I'll do the same thing I did with a buddy in a training session the other day. He missed it. He missed the session. He didn't actually know that there was no session that day. Nonetheless, he goes, "Hey, I missed it," and he knocked out 100 burpees. So I'm knocking out 100 burpees in accountability for pushing this one out a day late. Second, the reason. Again, not an excuse, but what's going on here. So project this week has been around, looks like we're all going to work remote for a while, right? Well, it's getting the studio redone here, the work remote space. So I'll try to give a peek of that here coming up soon. Standing desk is just showed up. And I think all that is going to combine not only in a new training space, but possibly even, if acoustics are good, where we're doing the show from as well. So that's exciting. Nonetheless, here we are. A little bit of a lag on today's show, but I think it'll be well worth it. Tracy, today's guest, Tracy Goodwin, is a really nice follow-up to last episode. Last time we had Mark England, who talks about the power of words, how words become stories and stories become habits and beliefs. And then once those patterns are created, it works the other way around. Our beliefs start to shape our words, and our words our actions. And once that's on autopilot, unless you take the time to stop it, recognize it, fix it, it just starts to play by itself, right? It's on autopilot. And that's in terms of words, the words in our head and the words that come out of our mouths and on paper and things like that. Well, today's guest studies a similar field. It's about the voice. Her voice, Tracy, was stifled as a child, the youngest of four, a father who was a workaholic, a mom she describes as a narcissist. She was literally stifled. Her parents didn't want to hear her speak. And then as an actor on stage in college, another actor got abusive and literally beat her voice out of her. Her voice changed as a result of the abuse. And in that tragedy, in recovery from that tragedy, she found the link between what was going on in her head, her psychology, her story, her belief system, and the way her voice manifested. So she now helps others. She helps entrepreneurs, executives, parents, leaders understand, train in the voice, train to understand how what's going on in their head shows up in their voice and how that relates to connections with others. It's this study of and this coaching of the voice is another way of working on the best version of yourself. It's about training how the voice can help you in that connection, in those relationships, in speaking at work. Not only we think about listening authentically, but speaking authentically and understanding that those who are receiving our voice are, if nothing else, subconsciously picking up on tones and communicating probably what's in our head. If that's a belief, if it's an assurance, something that's coming through, we may not even realize. So as Tracy says, if you want more, if you're not realizing everything and fulfillment and satisfaction in your life, if it's your earning potential, if it is your relationships, if it's your connections at work, if it's feeling like others are listening to you, the voice and the psychology behind the voice, what she calls psychology of the voice, is a direct connection between our thoughts and our emotions and what comes out and how it goes in for somebody else and that connection we make with each other. So here as we close out 2020 and think about 2021 and further goals to improve ourselves, what better place to think about how we're going to show up now and rolling into next year. We talked about words last week. This week we're going to talk about articulation of thoughts and stories and our beliefs in the voice. So captivate the room with Tracy Goodwin. All right, welcome. I am super excited today to welcome on the show Tracy Goodwin. She's the founder and owner of Captivate the Room. So today we're going to talk about some amazing stuff that is unique, and I'm super interested to hear about psychology of the voice. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
I am too. You know, when I read about you, I read about how you transform the voices of celebrities, professionals, and entrepreneurs. You've been doing this for, I think, over 30 years, and you talk about teaching people how to find their voice, which I've heard that sort of idiom and always thought it was just metaphorical, but you talk about things that really do power people up and charge them up with practical benefit, like effective communication, whether that's at work or in relationships, literally saving time in meetings. I think all of us are on Zoom meetings all day long now, and just, connections, whether it's emotional, whether it's influential, those kind of things. So I'm really excited to hear about what it is you do and have going on. Can you just start us off with a bit of a summary on Captivate the Room?
Sure. What I do is, well, I call it voice. I call it a voice coach, but really it's about transformation through the vehicle of the voice. People don't often realize the absolute power that they have in their voice. And I don't mean power like in a bad way, but it is the instrument that tells me who you are, that it is the instrument that allows me to connect with you or you to me. It is the instrument that creates the emotional connection. It's the instrument that makes us feel. There is so much to it that people don't really even realize and don't maximize because they're working off of what they believe to be true, what their subconscious is telling them, what the world tells them. And so what I do is I strip all that stuff away that the world put in place and bring people back to who they really are, and so that they can reveal that in the way that they use their voice in such a way that they command a presence, that they stop people from tuning out, that they connect with people instantly, and they have the ability to captivate the listener, which really is about making people feel. So there's lots of little tiny nuances in that, but that's what I do.
Yeah, this is amazing, and it sounds super deep. I've spent so much time on my own sort of journey and through this show, exploring what I think I would categorize as how we talk to ourselves, that voice in our own head, and how that empowers us, or how that helps us show up differently to the people around us, how we might want to show up and how we want to be perceived. And this sounds like maybe the complementary side of this is, how do I use my literal voice, my audio presence? And maybe I should be really excited about this as somebody who's putting their voice out to the universe through a show. But is that kind of the right way to think about it?
That's so perfect. And I mean, that's it exactly. Because literally, if we go all the way to the beginning of psychology of the voice and how I created it and what I researched and found to be true, this is where we start. What is the noise in your head? Is the noise in your head saying, nobody really wants to hear what you have to say? Well, that is going to shape what comes out of your mouth. And the tones that you use and how you say what you say. And we're going to decide who you are from that. And that might not be who you really are. But that driver, which is what I call it, or I call it the voice story, it's calling the shots.
We might be jumping right into the mechanics of this thing here, but so this is the way I'm thinking about it, and correct me where I'm wrong, or let's dive in. So I started with sort of getting better at, or learning to get better at shaping thoughts to then shape actions and behaviors and things like that. And some of us learn this, or were taught this earlier on, and others like me, were learning to get better at it later in life. Then I think as I've gotten more in tune to how that shows up for me, I've also had the opportunity to sort of tune into other types of communication, maybe more nonverbal. So for example, my wife is extremely perceptive. And so she'll react to maybe facial expressions that I've got that I probably learned just, behavioral learning as a child, that are probably not even all that conscious to me anymore. And maybe they're purposefully expressing something that I'm feeling or want to communicate, or maybe they've just become habit. But then on the other side of that is somebody else perceiving them. And I've found that oftentimes whatever I might have, shown on my face is being picked up on by my wife in something, in a way totally different than what I have intended to communicate. Right. So then if we extend that to our voice and literally connecting via words and sort of audio, is that the distinction between what you mean to put out there to the world and kind of how it gets perceived?
Very much, very much. There are sounds all over our voices that generally we don't even know are there. Our subconscious put them in, and the listener's subconscious is assessing them. So an example, you gave a great example. An example over here might be, let's say I'm a team leader, and I'm thinking this person really can't get this done. And I've asked them a number of times if they can get it done, but I'm not specifically saying, I don't believe you can get this done. But that thought is in there. And let's say I've had to do it over and over and over, or maybe it's not a work relationship. Maybe it's a different relationship, and it's in my voice. So that person, their subconscious is going to pick it up and make their decisions based on that. Just like that facial expression, there are tones in the voice. Go back to thought. Let's say my thought says, I don't really think you're going to get these words right, because that's a trick of the subconscious. Subconscious wants to keep you safe, wants to protect your heart. The voice is the orchestra of your heart. So the subconscious is up there going, yeah, you better get those words right or nobody's going to listen. So you get all locked up in, I got to get these words right. And you constantly start disconnecting into your head to get the words right. So when you deliver, you literally almost have no movement in your voice. You sound so disconnected that we can't even connect with you, because you're really not there. You're really up in your brain trying to get something right. And you do that a handful of times, and now you've got a habit.
So it just goes flat. There's no connection there.
That's right.
Got it.
That's right. Or if a lot of people are in the past or the future and they are worried about the future. They're worried about judgment. They're worried about getting the words. They're worried, worried, worried. They don't have to do that very long, disconnect up into their head to worry about judgment before they believe that it's true. And then they've created a habit where they're never really grounded in the now to have a conversation with us right now. And so the listener might pick that up as indifference, or you don't really care about me. And that's not the truth. The truth is I'm worried about you judging me or whatever.
Right. So it sounds like we've almost got it all backwards. That maybe the first priority should be that connection, and then we can start worrying about the right words and making sure that we stay present in that conversation.
Yeah, I love that you said that we get it backwards. I think I say that at least once a day. We really get it backwards. We get all in the outcome. So, outcome driven, that's a great quality, right? That most successful people are outcome driven. So, I never want to take that away. But what people don't realize is when I'm already in the outcome and I'm driving to the outcome and you're not in the outcome, you don't even know what the outcome is. We've missed a connection point.
Wow. Okay. So I need to know more about how to do this, how this works, how to get better at this. But let's go back a bit. How did all this start for you? I think you have a theater background. So do I have to be a theater person to get good at this? How did this all come to be?
No, in fact, a lot of people, I think, they hear voice coach, they hear things like that, and that's what they think. They think actors, they think performers, they think singers. And really, that's the last thing we're trying to do. I don't want to make you an actor. I don't want you to perform. I don't want you to be on. I want to get you down to the core of the best version of who you really are. But yes, I was an actor. I was actually raised in a family where I really wasn't allowed to speak. It was an extreme version of children are to be seen and not heard. So by the time I was 12, I had found the platform of speaking and acting. And I was winning speaking awards. I was acting. That gave me a place to use my voice and have my voice validated. So I went on to college to study acting. And when I was a freshman in college, I did have somewhat of a catastrophic event take place that really catapulted me into this voice land, but I still didn't get it in that moment, how profound it was, what was happening. I was in a play, and a freshman in a play, that's like unheard of. Freshmen just didn't get cast as a lead in a play. So it was a really big deal to me. And I had been in the play before, and there was a slap scene and a choke scene in the play. The play was The Runner Stumbles, which is about a priest that falls in love with a nun, and she gets murdered, and he ultimately goes on trial for her murder. So we're rehearsing, and the young man playing across from me starts really hitting me, not stage hitting me, really hitting me. And it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And of course, everybody in the cast is like, why aren't you saying anything? What they didn't realize was I had this backstory. You don't say no. You don't complain. You don't get mad. You don't say anything. And he kept hitting me and hitting me and hitting me. At some point, my sister saw me and said, you realize your jaw is black, don't you? Because I had been hit so much. And 3 nights before we opened the play, he just started punching me and broke my nose and threw me face down on the hardwood floor. And it was, I was bleeding heavily, and went to the hospital, and my best friend went with me, and he said, it's over. You have to say something. And so I mustered up all my courage, and I went to the director and I said, very timidly, is there any way you can make him stop hitting me? And she looked at me and she said, you have chosen a profession in which you must suffer for your art. And if you can't, I'll replace you.
Oh
and in that second, in that dialogue and the tone she used with me, I started talking like this. Literally, my voice went up like this and it didn't go down. And that was really the beginning of what happens when that input comes in. What is it? How does that subconscious take that and alter how we use our voice? Because that's what I ultimately determined happened. And I subconsciously went, oh, this is bad. You've made somebody mad. You better be nice. And that instantly changed my voice.
Right. That is, it literally changed your voice. And it's a
Literally.
shocking story and an even more shocking reaction from the people around you. If I pause just for a second and back up, you mentioned a childhood where maybe the parenting philosophy, if that's the right way to call it, was that children shouldn't even have a voice. I mean, there's so much formative stuff that happens in the first 5 years and then throughout childhood. And as our brains are developing, even into our early 20s, probably the age where this happened to you. How, tell me a little bit more about that as a childhood and how that connected to how you reacted in the moment with that abuse.
Well, in many years later, when I was growing up, I was the fourth of four children. And I really just kind of thought my mom was tired. I mean, as children, we love our parents and we seek love from our parents. And we're not thinking things, we haven't been exposed to theories and philosophies and ideas, obviously, before we're five. What I now know to be true is that I was raised by a very narcissistic mother and I had a workaholic father who I adored but was never there. And of course I adored my mother too. This is not a, it's not a, there was no unforgiveness, let me say that. But it was, you couldn't say anything without setting her off. And it was much better if you just don't bother me. I don't want to hear you. I don't care what you think or feel. I don't want to hear it. You weren't allowed to say no. You weren't allowed to say, I don't want to do that. You weren't allowed, you especially weren't allowed to express negative emotions. So you never were allowed to get mad. So you can imagine, so that was all laid in. What I would later discover in my research is that before we're five, literally one phrase can determine how we're going to use our voice for the rest of our life. So here we are 15 years later. I am perceiving that this director is mad at me. What happens? I don't say anything because I've literally created that habit. In my childhood, I don't know that I realized it was as dysfunctional as it was. I think we know what we know, but now in retrospect, I see, wow, I was not allowed to express myself on any level. And it didn't matter what you did, there was going to be or said. This is why, you just stop talking, because it's better, because she doesn't want to hear you anyway. But when you do use your voice, you're going to get one of two things: an explosion or the silent treatment. So there was so much around voice for me before I ever even got cast in that play.
Wow. Yeah, it's so scary almost as a parent to think about these you said one phrase could basically change a childhood or a life, right? And nobody as a parent thinks that they have it quite right. It's interesting, as you and I were jumping on to do this interview, we intended to do video. It's great to have that sort of remote face-to-face connection and publish a video along with an audio file. But hey, we got internet problems today. So what do we have to do? We adapt. And one of us had commented, these are the kind of things that could frustrate you or that you would let bother you at one point in time. Then you have to learn to be more adaptable. But as children, we have like the ultimate adaptability. And somehow children, survive, right? Although may end up with an adaptation that persists through life, that maybe we don't find the opportunity or get enlightened to the opportunity to question. We carry all these stories. We continue to create stories in our own heads about things like how others are perceiving what they mean to communicate to, things like that, right? And really, these things that maybe we've taken for granted as a way that shaped how we behave. But now, hey, we grow up and we have an opportunity to unpack all of that and maybe question all these things about beliefs, about relationships, and in this case, the voice and the communication.
That's so true. And I don't believe, my research does not show in any way, nor in my heart of hearts do I believe, even in my scenario, that any of it is meant to be malicious. Sure, sometimes maybe, there could be 1% chance, but I don't believe that teachers and parents and neighbors and the guy at the grocery store are thinking, hey, I'm going to destroy the way that kid uses his voice the rest of his life. I think it's simply, we don't have a manual and we don't realize the power of our voice. And I think what really creates the problem, because every time I say that line about, one phrase before we're 5, every parent gets nervous. And I don't want people to feel that way. If I look back on the research and I look back on the history of who I've studied, and even in my own life, it is the compounding of those choices, of those words, of those sounds that lock it in, if that makes sense. So
that in a way that become patterns,
that's
basically,
right.
or
That's right.
repetitive.
That's
Okay.
that's right. So let me give you another example.
Sure.
Bill, a guy I worked with, and I will call him Bill. I use this story a lot. He had 6 sisters, 6 older sisters, and Bill had a really quiet voice. But we look at Bill's psychology of the voice story and we see that it was years and years and years of his sisters going, Bill, we don't want to hear you, Bill, when they were growing up. So it's years and years and and the more it's compounded, the more so yes, my mother told me she didn't want to hear what I had to say. But then we look at the whole picture. Then were there relationships? Were there bosses? Were there neighbors? Were there 6 older sisters? What's the big picture? And the more exposure we get, the more the subconscious really buys in to protect us, really buys in and really locks habits into the muscle memory.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think we're really good at either spotting patterns or thinking we find patterns in things.
Yeah.
That allow. I think ultimately this is all survival mechanism type of stuff.
Oh, for sure.
So what happened? Okay, you had the abusive event or events around the preparation for that play, and then your voice literally changed.
Mm-hmm.
Then what?
So I changed universities, and at my new university, the head of acting, she said, God, you're really talented, but we've got to fix your voice. I had no idea that I talked like this. I hadn't made the connection. And I thought, what are you talking about? I'm an award-winning speaker. What do you mean something's wrong with my voice? But that action got me into studying under some of the greatest voice masters of our time. In that work, I became fascinated with voice, and I became fascinated with how accents are created, and how we if we shift our face this way, what can happen, and all of that. So working with expert voice people, I got my voice back, and I became fascinated with voice. Still was not on my radar that I was going to do this for a living, but I had a real hunger to learn. Why do you sound like you do? And why do I sound like I do? And why do some people not use their voice? And why are some people loud? And really, it probably started much younger. I really probably developed my ear for voices navigating my household. But I got my voice back very quickly. I became fascinated with voices, but I still wasn't a voice coach. I was acting. I made my living doing television commercials. I got a master's degree. I was directing plays all over the world. And people kept finding me to coach their voices. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. How am I supposed to be a voice coach? Look at my history. I hadn't put it together yet that it was that history that was a part of my purpose to develop what I've developed. And I coached them. I coached actors. I mostly worked with actors. I mostly worked in the arena of dialects. And the more I coached voices, the more I fell in love with it. And I left acting and I left directing at a very young age, very early in the career. And I committed 100% to coaching voices, specializing in dialects. And dialects is actually what led me to do all this study around the subconscious, which is how psychology of the voice was created. So I had started weaning off of working with actors and working more and more with business people, and have really just spent all these years now, 30 years, researching voice and teaching voice. And I'm just fascinated with it.
It is fascinating. And psychology of the voice, such a great term for it. How does one, so you weren't even self-aware, even though you had this level of expertise, and it was a practice and a tool in this passion of yours. And by the way, thank you for the courage to tell that story. Hopefully everybody doesn't have trauma that significant, but we've all got traumas and dramas of some degree that we grow up dealing with, right? And I really admire and appreciate when people are willing to talk about those things, not only because it may help others, but to me, there is almost always, if you wait long enough, you just talked about your purpose. There's almost always some sort of equal and opposite or greater good thing that comes out of there, that post-traumatic growth that we can find. So I appreciate you tying that stuff together. You had somebody that helped you come to the realization that your voice had changed and maybe could change further for the better. So how does you go work with an executive, how does an executive come to the realization that what's the right way to say this? I guess it's not that their voice is wrong or off or bad. It could be better. It could be more powerful and effective.
For me, the heartbreak in all of this is sometimes people don't recognize the power of their voice. They don't, because that's such a great question. How do they know that maybe they're not maximizing their voice? First of all, I don't believe in bad voices. A lot of people will come to me and they'll say, I hate the sound of my voice. My voice sounds terrible. I don't believe any voice is bad. I believe that there are voices and there are voices that can be maximized for greater impact. So instead of really reflecting on the voice, how do I sound? I always say, look at your life. Are you getting what you want? Do you have the following you want? Do you have the money you want? How do you do with your team? How's your relationships in your personal life? Are people listening to you, or are they tuning out? Do you have inner freedom when you stand up and have a conversation? Do you feel comfortable commanding the space? How are you feeling about pausing? And when we look at those kinds of things, that's when we can say, hold on a minute. I actually can't get this team member to listen to me. That's how you know you're not maximizing the power of your voice.
I would think for almost all of us, unless we've gone through this effort with somebody like you, there's definitely room to improve. When you say that, I've come across people who are more, I don't know, forceful or loud in the way they speak, and they command an audience. And the opposite, those who may be loud but don't really have that same connection or charisma or whatever it is. And then you find some people who can have the same effect, the same power, and be very soft-spoken. So it doesn't sound like one size fits all.
It's really not. And I don't know how, I just couldn't imagine approaching any of the work that I do with a one size fits all. And that example you gave is so great. This is where we run into trouble. We say, oh, that guy over there, he can really command a presence. So I'm gonna, and he's got a loud, booming voice. I'm gonna be like that. It's not really even about that. It's about, are there voice masks and blocks and barriers that are keeping us out? We're after the best version of you. And that's not going to be how I do it. It's not going to be how you do it, right? I am very, well, some people would almost call me over dramatic, but this is who I am, right? So we can't start copying people. What we have to be willing to do is drop the armor, drop the masks, and be willing to let people see the best version of us, see who we really are. In the workspace especially, I hear it almost daily. Well, Tracy, I've got to be professional. Like we've got this either or scenarios going all around us, like you're going to be professional or you're not. No, it doesn't work that way. So people will put up a barrier of, well, I'm going to talk to you like the professional. And then the minute I start talking to you like the professional, now you feel differently about me. Right. And so we've got this mask of professionalism. Really what it is a mask of safety. You might judge me if you know who I really am. And I don't even know what that means for me to not be professional, because I live in this either or space, and I have this fear that I'm going to lose my mind or something and go crazy. It doesn't work that way. But we're so afraid of judgment that we put these things in place, right?
Yeah, I think I follow you, and I can relate to that. I've come across people who, you get them out for lunch or a coffee or whatever, and it's a real human being. And then all of a sudden you're back in a corporate setting somehow. And there's more of this sort of guarded persona. Yeah. And somehow it's flat, I guess is the word I used earlier. There's just no character to connect to. There's no emotion. There's no personality to it to sort of feel that you're talking to the same human you just had lunch with.
That's right. And if I don't know who you are, and I don't know how you feel, and I don't know how I should feel talking to you, I'm not going to connect with you. And that rolls into am I going to give you my money? Right? It's really about that connection. And I don't know if people always really understand how much their voice plays into that.
I don't know if this is too cliche, but is this about authenticity?
100%. 100%. And I feel like a lot of times, and I don't say this as a criticism, but I feel like a big part of my work is a big permission slip to get people to be who they are. I just worked with a gal and colored Judy. We rolled in fun Judy. It was one of these, I've got to be professional and I've got to drive to this outcome and I've got to get this right and cross this T. And we rolled in fun Judy, and she literally got a huge contract because somebody saw her on a training and went, wow, you're one of us.
Right.
But but we don't give people that chance. So yeah, it's that authentic voice, even if it is cliche. Are you showing me who you really are?
Right. Okay. So how long does this take? Who do you work with? How does a process like this work? How do we learn to get better?
I work with, that's the hardest question. Anybody, the branding people and the marketing people, who's your target market is the hardest question you can ask me, because my answer is always everybody, because everybody has a voice and everybody can maximize their voice to another level. I do primarily now work with corporate professionals and entrepreneurs, but everybody can maximize their voice. When I work with people, I don't work with people for longer than 8 weeks. And that's the power of laser focused techniques that are specifically for you. It's not step one, get louder. I always start with that voice story because that driver is calling the shots. Now, we don't have to do a deep dive on it. We don't have to spend months figuring out that story. We never even have to know the story, but we have to start really looking at the noise in our head and say, is that ultimately true? Is it ultimately true that nobody wants to hear what you have to say? Well, of course not. But until somebody says to you, is that ultimately true? What is that noise in your head? You're going to let that noise run. And sometimes you're not even conscious of that noise. So that's the first place we start. I believe that we have to eradicate the story and the habit that it left behind. The habit that it left behind might be somebody who speaks really fast, and they go really, really fast because there's a story behind there that says nobody wants to hear you. So they speak really, really fast to get to the other side of it. Or maybe there's a story, you got to get it right. So they speak really, really fast to get to the other side and make sure they got it right. We have to look at both. So we get rid of that driver, and then we take a look at masks. What are you hiding behind? And you can really ask yourself this question. Are you trying to prove something? Do you, what, if you really stand back and take an honest look and say, what do I think it is that is keeping me from getting what I want? Well, maybe I use too many words. Maybe I'm too quiet. Maybe, take a look at what it is that you think the problem is and see if you can identify that as a block. Like, yeah, I'm being really quiet because I really don't want you to hear me. And then we go to plugging in the best version of you, which part of that is elements of vocal variety. Part of that is like this gal I mentioned, bits of you. Are you showing me who you really are? What do you do? Do you laugh? Do you this isn't a good example, but do you get sarcastic? Do you, what are all the shades of you? We start rolling that in. And it's a 3-pronged process, and it's laser focused to the sounds that aren't working for you in the subconscious. And sometimes it's literally just expanding what you're already doing, because everybody has a voice aversion too. There's 5 elements of vocal variety in the way I teach things, and everybody has an aversion to one of those elements. So if you stay on that one note, I'll go back to fast. If every single solitary thing you say is fast, and part of your audience can't listen to fast because of their voice story, you're not maximizing your potential. And that's the last thing we plug in. So it's really a very quick process because it's so laser focused.
Yeah, I love the focus and the speed, especially, excuse me, given that you're working with executives, right? Not going to have a lot of time and probably want quick results. And I think some of this, just to pay you a compliment, must speak to your ability, your intuition, your gift in what you do, because this could very easily, we call it psychology of the voice. This could start with, lay down on the couch and tell me about your mother, tell me about your father. The fact that you must be able to find somebody's voice story, help them find it so quickly to be able to take those other steps is really powerful.
Well, thank you. And I do literally think of it as a gift. I don't, people ask me a lot of times, how did you learn to hear the way you hear? It's extraordinary what you can hear. I don't know. I don't really know whether it was a navigation tool, whether it was, my destiny to begin with, whether, I don't know, but I know that I love that I can hear the way that I can hear. And that's a big part of it is I can put that listening ear on and I can discern the problem right away. And generally that's the power of the work, is that the realm that I work in, people aren't, it really never entered their mind. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. It's just like so many things that we don't know until we know. But it's extraordinary how fast you can shift things. And the work in and of itself to this day, after all these years, amazes me. And what amazes me is the shifts that happen for people.
Right. Yeah. No, I can relate. And in some of the coaching I do, it's tough work. It's tough work for people that want to put in the work, right? So they're working on
Yeah.
themselves, but like anything, it's got its ups and downs. But it's just amazing to see the efforts that people go through. It's amazing to see when people have breakthroughs,
Yes.
revelations. It's so empowering.
Yeah. And I think just like anything, people have to be willing to want it,
Yeah,
but when they do, and they're such an open vessel, it's really cool. It's really cool to see people step into the power of their voice, something that they've already got, and that now they can maximize to change relationships and get more of what they want. But really, I guess at the end of the day, my favorite part of all the work is the inner freedom that people get, because so many people are shockingly worried about the words and the judgment, and am I getting it right, and how do I say this? I mean, there's a lot of people that have inner turmoil around that, and to free people from that, to me, is the gift, because that's what my life was. See, growing up in that family where I couldn't express, no, it didn't matter what you wanted. It didn't matter what you dreamed of. Don't say it. I don't want to hear it. And that created this tremendous inner struggle for me. So I relate on such a deep level for people that have inner struggle around using their voice.
sure. Yeah, I can clearly tell what a passion you have for this. Obviously, a gift. I can see how liberating and freeing this would be for people when they've made the type of progress you're describing. Just a couple more questions for you. When you talked a little bit about the step of creating awareness, and you even sort of mentioned some self-identification of a problem or a blockage. So there's just a little story that stuck with me, and I don't think it's quite spot on, but I want to ask you about it because maybe there's a tool in here that relates. So this was something I saw as a social media post from a an ultra distance runner that a lot of people would know of, and he was describing, he's very self motivated, clearly,
Mm.
but was describing recently a little bit of a lack of motivation there. Just not putting the shoes on and running out right out the door. A process, some self realization that there was a lag there. Spending half an hour before he could really get up and go, and to sort of give himself a fresh look at it. Instead of having that conversation in his own head, he grabbed the iPhone or whatever it was and hit record and talked to himself out loud, and then played it back to himself. And not too many of us have the opportunity to hear recordings of our own voices. And a lot of times when we do, we don't necessarily like how it sounds. It doesn't sound like we think we sound,
Mm-hmm.
literally, which is sort of everything you do, right? But
Yeah.
that was his tool for going, gosh, who is this person? Who's this
Mm-hmm.
person saying this? Because this isn't really how I feel or want to feel or think I feel. And that
Mm-hmm.
became a wake up call to, okay, I'm going to change how I'm thinking, how I'm speaking to myself in my head, how I'm now speaking to myself out loud, and how it relates to performance in his case.
Yeah. I love that. And that is definitely a tool. That sounds to me almost like thinking out loud. It's really easy for us to get bogged down in the noise in our head, I believe. I mean, I teach this stuff and I can get off in the future. I have to bring myself back to the now. And it's so that talking it through, I think, is critical, because if you can just spend if you just spent 10 sentences talking out loud, you would realize what you're saying is not ultimately true. But when we're in it, when it's running in our head, the subconscious it's like life and death. I got to protect this guy. So that noise gets really loud, but when we verbalize it, it takes the sting out of it. So I think that's a great technique. The only thing I caution people of, like you mentioned, we don't think we're going to sound the way we don't sound the way we think we're going to hear ourselves sound. If anybody watches your videos, and that's a whole nother element, but watching videos or listening to recordings, just know that your subconscious is the one going, oh my gosh, you sound terrible. That's not true. But your subconscious wants you to stop talking so that it can protect you, which
Right.
you're safe anyway.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I mean, I had that experience when I started this show. It was something. There were a lot of reasons I did it. Clearly, I did it because I wanted to, and there was some driving catalyst there. But that was one point of resistance. And part of the
Yes.
whole exercise was to get past some of these areas
Yeah.
of discomfort and resistance and grow in different ways. But that was sure one of them. Going back and editing, and gosh, I don't want to listen.
Yeah.
I'll listen to the guest all day long. I don't want to listen to myself.
Right.
Well, get over it, right? Get over it.
Yeah, because 99.5% of what you perceive we're hearing is not, that's not accurate, because your subconscious really, his number one goal is to get you to stop talking. So even doing a podcast, I mean, there's probably people out there that are longing to do a podcast, but that resistance kicks in. And when you told me that story, that's what I thought about. That noise, is resistance. And the goal is to then physically push through that with an action, because it's then you're rewriting the habit, then you're changing what's in the muscle memory.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe the mindset piece of that I think can also help, along with the determination to push through it and the realization of what that resistance means or what the subconscious is trying to protect. But the other mindset element of that is just flipping it around and realizing that if that resistance is there or that fear is there or whatever that is, and it's not a life or death fear, then it's probably a great indication that it's an area for growth. It's an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. It is. And really I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it's so simple, everybody should do it. But really part of it is we're working off of old proof. We had an event happen. We had that public speaking class in high school that everything went off the rails. We're working off of old proof. If you take the action, if you take a different action, you're going to get new proof to work off of.
Yeah, these are all old stories that we have a chance
Right.
to re-examine and reinvent.
Right. And we're just got them on replay. Oh my gosh, if I do a podcast, or if I do this, it's going to be like that time back in 87 when that guy. No, it's not. That's over.
Right. Yeah. Which again, I think we could just draw it back to being present.
Yes.
The past is gone and the future is
Yes.
our imagination at this point.
That's it. Being in the now is critical to maximizing the power of your voice.
Well, let me ask you the favor of one more example, if you would.
Sure.
You and I have known each other for just about an hour now. So I'll be vulnerable and say, let's use me as an example. You have the gift of this ear. What can I improve on?
Oh my goodness. It always makes me nervous when people do this. When I'm on the spot. Well, I need to listen with my listening ear. What's one thing that you could improve on? Tell me something. Tell me why tell me how long you've done the podcast and what you love so much about it. That'll give me a second to listen to you.
Yeah, sure. And maybe I'll back up to your point of there may be people out there that would love to start a podcast, or they've thought about it, or just haven't for some reason, right? And I've actually had the opportunity to speak to and work with a couple of people offline recently who've wanted to do just that. Some of whom have launched and others who haven't quite launched yet. But I take them back to some of the reasons I decided to do it. A lot of it is around personal growth. And one of the things I have really hit on with the couple of people that I've had these conversations with recently is, you look at, there's a tendency to compare yourself to other people in almost everything, right? And with social media and with podcasts, you want to be Joe Rogan. Everybody wants to be Joe Rogan,
right.
but there's only one Joe Rogan, and you want to have 100,000 followers or 10,000 or 1,000 or 100, whatever it is that you're sort of judging yourself against. But the reality is, if you're doing this, start with yourself, right? And if you're doing it for a good reason to grow, fantastic. If not a single person listens, if it's just your mom or your wife or your significant other listening, great. You're doing something that most people will never even attempt, and you're growing because of it. And then the reality is, if you've got one listener or 100 or 1,000, you're adding value to somebody's life. You're touching somebody. Maybe in a social media world, it doesn't seem huge, but if you had the opportunity to walk into a theater and give a speech to 100 people or to 1,000 people, that would feel pretty special, right? And so I just feel blessed. I'm grateful to have the opportunity that I have because I took the step to do this, to just meet and learn from amazing people like you. And it's been a journey over the last couple of years I couldn't even have imagined.
Okay, that was great. So I was listening with my listening ear, and now I have my voice coaching zone hat on.
All right.
Are you sure you're good with this?
I'm
I mean,
good
I
with
love
this.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Lay it on me.
So nothing, I mean, well, there's nothing bad, but you've got so many great things going. I have to tell you one thing, and I know I did actually notice this about halfway through the interview.
Mm-hmm.
The second most powerful vocal variety element there is the quiet bit. You do it exquisitely. I mean, it's so good. And who would have thought, wait a minute, what do you mean I need a quiet bit? But we subconsciously process a quiet bit as you care about us. It pulls us close. There's no barriers. They're very easy to connect with. I feel like I know who you are. I clearly know how you feel, and I feel like you know how I feel. Where I have a suggestion to maximize what you're already doing really well. You've got great movement in your voice, and when I talk about movement, I'm talking about vocal variety. I am going to backtrack in a second to something I want to ask you about when you first started talking. But there is a way that you can maximize your moments even more so that the listener gets an even deeper emotional experience. And that is simply when you say big things, and that's I like chocolate could be a big thing, right? When you
Yep.
deliver a moment, let me have that pause. Let me have a little longer pause sometimes so I can enjoy that experience with you. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
You're doing it already. I want you to let me have some moments even longer, right? So, and you don't have to do it all the time, just every once in a while, because you lay down some great stuff and it's filled with emotion. Let me just hold that for a minute sometimes. I think that is one thing that would take you even to a whole nother level. Obviously, people identify with you, and it's clear one of the things that I love so much about this conversation with you is I clearly know how you feel. And we don't, like, even when I use that terminology, sometimes executives and professionals go, whoa, 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 hold on a minute. Because there's this perception that feeling must mean cry on the conference table. No, it doesn't. Like, you're doing it, you're using it, it's clear you're connecting to a passion and revealing how you feel, which is great. That's really great for us. Now, every once in a while, give us a little bit more to linger on. But I'm curious, are you a thinker?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Total left brain type.
Are you? Do you ever, and this, it's not a trick question, but do you, when you start talking about something, do you ever find that you're thinking about it first and then you kind of get in a zone?
Think about that. Yeah, I would say that's absolutely the case. And I guess what I'm thinking about literally right now is ways that has shown up for me to work on. I hadn't really thought about it as much on sort of the output side of things as working on listening skills and trying to stop thinking while listening and just being more present in not thinking about how to reply, not trying to think about how to solve a problem, really just listening and understanding, seeking to understand and connect. So if I know where you're headed, and please don't let me stop you, go ahead. I think that's the place that I've had a chance to maybe realize the thinking element and setting aside and listening. But tell me more about what you heard in that around the speaking side of things.
So I work in sounds that are ridiculously tiny.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ridiculous, like a hair thin, tiny. And when you first started talking about podcasting, right at first, there was this tiny little sound that made me think, is he thinking about something? Is there any and where I come from when I deliver something, I'm really coming from the place of how is it being perceived subconsciously?
Mm-hmm.
And what I noticed was one line in, you hit a zone. I mean, you were cooking with gas. And I loved that. And so I don't know if you're, if you are thinking a little bit about that front end and then you hit that zone, what I would say to you is you already are in the zone. You already, come out of that gate strong.
Got it. Got
Is
it.
that,
I
is
understand
that
that.
helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Because it's so good. I mean, and really, as you started talking, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm really having to listen here. this is no pressure on you. This is pressure on me, right? Because you are bringing so much great stuff to the table. But when we really dive into this work, we can really start nutting out even, and it's literally like we started today, it's next level sounds. What's one more level up?
Right. Well, I appreciate you allowing me to put you on the spot in that and a little free consultation around it. But, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a little vulnerable with it as well
Yeah.
and see where that would lead. I really appreciate that it is that next level sort of thing. There's no bad voice. It's finding the next gear. So, I appreciate how you sort of deliver that as well. Hey, here's what's working well, and here's what we can make even better. Right.
Even better. So that split second you open your mouth, I'm like, I'm right there because I'm so intrigued because I know you.
And I wonder if I can combine those two things that you mentioned, maybe allow, if it takes me a little bit of traction to that second sentence to find that gear you described, well, maybe I can use that deeper pause that you mentioned to sort of find that place and then just come out rocking.
Yeah, totally. Take that pause and come out of the gate strong. Or even you can play with if you already know that first line you want to say, you come out of the gate strong on that line and then you pause so that you've grabbed our attention and then you've given us a second to go, wow, this guy gets me, or whatever it is, because that's the power of that pause. I delivered it to you from the perspective of, let us have that moment. Let us enjoy that experience with you because it's such a good experience you're creating. But really, pause is the most powerful because it is the utmost speaker to the subconscious that says, I care so much about you. I want you to process what I'm even saying here.
I get that. Well, this is such powerful stuff. And I think I said deep early on, psychology is deep. And this really is psychology of the voice. I feel like we could talk about this for a long time because I was thrilled to get a chance to learn from you and absolutely delivered on that. I really want to find a way to stay connected and learn more. For anybody else who wants to do so as well, what's the right way to engage with you, connect with you, and learn more about what you're doing?
Sure. The best place to find me is captivatetheroom.com. That's my website. I have all of the programs that I offer up under the Work With Me tab. And people can email me. My email is on the website. That's a great place to get in touch. As far as social media, I do LinkedIn under Tracy Goodwin. And then I do Instagram and Facebook under Captivate the Room. And I have a podcast called Captivate the Room as well.
Tell me a little bit about the podcast. So how do you explore this topic there?
Well, I started out with solo shows and interviews, and the show has, of course, morphed over the years. I've been doing the show about 6 years, And I've played with a lot of different things. And as a researcher, of course, I've watched what's worked, what's helped the audience, what's how, how am I reaching more people? So what I do now is I do one show a week and I alternate. One show is me teaching a principle or talking about a principle. I just did a big series on voice masks and I covered a lot of the voice masks. And then the next week, I will have people on the show where they come on and they talk about, of course, what they do and how they do it, but how they maximize their voice to serve their people. Sometimes people have a big voice story. Sometimes people don't have a big voice story, but they use their voice to touch lives in big ways. I think we should have you come on my show.
I would love that. I would
I
love to
would love
explore
it.
something on there. Yeah,
Yeah.
count me in 100%. And I really want to tune into that. And I'm going to not only get links to everything else out with this episode, but encourage listeners to do that as well. Just dive into some of these topics. And that would be maybe even a way to sort of get to know Tracy, right,
Yeah,
as a listener, and then figure out if it's a style that might resonate to engage you as a coach. And
for
again,
sure.
the fact that you have such a laser focused process that's 8 weeks, what does that look like in a COVID world? Or is this always a sort of virtual coaching that you do?
It's always virtual. Not a lot changed for me in the COVID world. I have been sitting here in front of this screen for 12 years now. I started I wanted to reach the most people. And of course I lived in New York City for 15 years, but people were finding me from other countries. And this was back before Zoom. And I loved it. I loved that I could work with somebody in Australia and somebody in France or wherever. So I've always had a virtual business. Not that I didn't do live things, but the last 4 years I worked in Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles, and even my Los Angeles people, they did online because they didn't want to sit in the traffic. So I've always done virtual and I love it. And I remember in the early days, people were real hesitant, like, how can you coach my voice online? Don't I need to be in the same room with you? And you really don't. I just have to be able to hear your voice and be able to plug techniques in. So when people, I have a group program that's 8 weeks, and that's the longest I work with people. When I work coach people solo, it's 6 weeks. And it's because it's so laser focused. Literally, I have figured out a system that gets people fast results. So we meet once a week, and even in the group program, we meet once a week. And literally, I have basically a checklist of what I need to lock in. How I'm going to lock it in, I don't know until I hear your voice, but I know where we're going on the map. So we start with foundation, because if we don't start with that story, nothing else is going to stick. You can do all the speak loud you want, but if that driver is making noise, is not going to stick. So we eradicate that driver, we eradicate that story, we start taking on masks, and then we head to vocal variety. And it's done through literal hands-on coaching, even in the group program. Tell me about that, just like what I did with you today. Tell me something so I can listen, and I start plugging stuff in. And then the homework is in the implementation. And maybe that's a literal homework assignment, but maybe it is every single person you come in contact with, you're going to approach it like it's a conversation rather than talking at them, or whatever it is. And then that's how we build the muscle. And then we just keep adding on, adding on, adding on. And at the end of 8 weeks, it's amazing how much at the end of 2 weeks, at the end of 1 week, people start seeing shifts. But it's literally the process. I've just figured out how to make it work fast.
That's an amazing framework that you got that works that quickly. I just was glancing around my room here, and this is something that popped in my head at the beginning of our conversation, and what I saw just reminded me. So I just want to share a really quick story to sort of emphasize this realization I had early in life, and then just remembered as we got to speak. I just looked at a box of stuff my mom pulled out of the attic when she moved and sent me. It is pictures and etc. from my youth. So I found a picture of my fifth grade teachers Mr. and Mrs. Bostic. And I forget which of those taught us English, and maybe both. And they would hammer away at this thing they said over and over again, is that as you grow up and you go through life, the first, at most, all it takes is 2 sentences out of your mouth for somebody to perceive a lot of things about you, your level of education, et cetera. Right. So for whatever reason, those little things that stick with you, that stuck with me somewhere back there. And when I knew we were going to have the opportunity to talk today, that sort of popped out. So I really love that you've got something that's so effective. You've evolved that it can work that quickly. That little story just reemphasized to me, in addition to everything you just said, how important it is, how that perception comes across so quickly.
I love that. And they were ahead of their curve because science has, I don't know when this was, but science now
it was a long
time ago. Well, science has now proven that in the first 30 seconds, our subconscious starts deciding, do you live in the city? Do you live in the country? Do you like dogs? Do you like cats? What kind of car do you drive? Did you go to college? Did you not go to college? Everything. And it's all based on sounds. So don't we want to maximize our best sounds? Right. So they were right.
They were right. It turns out your coaching work and your group coaching and your online courses, I just took a quick peek. It looks like, and again, we'll put links up to all these things, but the best way to, if somebody wants to move forward, would be to reach out directly, Tracy at captivatetheroom.com, TRACY, it looks like.
Yes. Yeah, that's the best way. You can definitely go to the website, but anybody feel free to shoot me an email anytime. I'm quick on the email.
Okay. I love it. Well, thank you again so much for your time today, Tracy. As I confessed before we got started, I get so captivated by these topics and the people I get a chance to meet. I'm terrible at keeping these things to 45 minutes or an hour. So thank you for running over and taking some extra time with me. And thank you so much for what you shared and what you do.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for having me. I just really loved having this conversation with you.
Yeah, likewise. And let's do something again on your show. I'd love to
For
do
sure.
that.
For sure.
All right, great. Thanks so much. Okay, super cool stuff with Tracy Goodwin. Thank you again to her. Hope you enjoyed that. I don't know if maybe you knocked out 100 burpees with me for me as you listened. If not, why not? Get on them. Can't hurt. It's good for you. Good stuff. And that's a different kind of training. But hope this idea of training the voice was interesting to you. She gave us a few ways to do that. She gave us some tips and techniques on how to think about it, and mostly why it's so important and how it shows up. So definitely check her out. Check out her website and her training programs, whether that's individual, group, or remote. And then follow her on social media. You can pick up some tips, further tips, and her podcast. Interesting stuff. All right, that's it for this time, guys. We're coming up here on the end of the year, so sneak an episode or two in before New Year's, maybe a 2020 wrap-up, look ahead to 21. Hope everyone is healthy, hanging in there, having fun, training hard. Get out there and get after it, and we'll see you next time.